Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Nora, how are you this morning?
Quite delightful. Quite delightful. It's a little cloudy here, but looking like another beautiful day.
You would not believe what it is here. Today is going to be over 70 degrees.
Oh my God.
On Monday, it was in the 20s. So they said that we're going to have about a 50-degree swing in a week. Humidity is up like you wouldn't believe. In my facility, we have an auxiliary air conditioner, so we can run AC even though the heat is going in the building. I walked into the hallway and it was like getting hit with this humid, hot air, like Louisiana heat swamp in my face. And I was like, oh, thank goodness we have the AC. Oh my gosh. So yeah.
Oh man.
And yet it's supposed to be 50 tomorrow, and by next week it'll be below freezing again. So we don't know what's going on around here.
No, every day it's like, okay, what do I wear today?
Uh-huh.
No, what do I wear this hour?
Exactly. I have more layers in this office. Exactly. Well, today's going to be an interesting one because you and I have known each other for years and years, and we've talked about a lot of different conditions and everything. One that we have not discussed at length is today's topic. So it's going to be interesting to hear the difference between what you do and what I do, and, you know, the comparisons, sort of compare and contrast based on our experiences. But we're going to talk about plantar fasciitis today.
Which is, in my experience, something people are always asking about.
Oh, yeah.
Clients, students, teachers. It's not that uncommon, and it is a bit of a pain in the foot,
Yes.
to be blunt. Yeah,
Yes.
It just, a lot of people get it. It gets recalcitrant, it gets recurring, and it's hard. It can be hard to manage. So I think it's something that'll be good to talk about, and good to talk about many different ways to deal with it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those that when it creeps up into someone, it can last for a long, long time.
It is. So for those of you who don't know what plantar fasciitis is.
Yeah, let's go through a little
plantar,
anatomy.
Yeah, this is just a little, where are we? This is the bottom of the foot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the sole of the foot has a superficial layer of fascia, sort of also called aponeurosis, which is basic connective tissue that connects into the gastroc and the soleus. So the Achilles, you can think of the Achilles tendon running down from the gastroc and the soleus, goes around the heel and spreads out through the bottom of the foot, creating that really most superficial layer, if you will, covering up all the muscles of the bottom of the foot. And that gets irritated and causes pain in the arch, pain in the heel typically, pain especially when you first step on it in the morning.
Yep.
Like you get out of bed and it's like, it's like you've got glass in your feet. And then once things warm up, it usually gets a little bit better.
And that's one of the telltale signs for this. Because I've had some people say, oh yeah, I think I have plantar fasciitis. And my first question is, when does it hurt the most? And if they say, oh, if I've been standing on it a long time, I say, well, that's not it.
Right.
This is definitely I haven't been on it. I've been sitting for a few hours, or I've been in bed for all night, and you stand on it and that fascia has shrunk up. It's begun to sort of shrink, and that first step is stretching it and literally tearing of the tissues, which is why it feels like walking on broken glass. And it takes about 5 to 10 steps before of like, if anybody's stepped on Legos before, you know the feeling, and after about 5 or 10 steps, things seem to ease up a little bit and ease up a little bit more. And eventually the more you're on it, the easier it is. But again, once you're off of it for a while, that fascia has a tendency to, again, sort of, I hate to use the word shrink up, but definitely begins to contract.
Well, going back to our discussion of tendonitis and tendinosis, this is related to those.
Yes.
It's called a fasciitis. It's an inflammation of a fascia, but it's certainly related to those. It's a connective tissue damage issue, right? So we talked about those where if you keep it moving, then you don't get the cross linkages within the fibers. So that idea of shrinking up, I always think of as it's like the fibers kind of cross-link together. And as soon as you step on it and it has to stretch, because that plantar fascia is like a trampoline. A lot of people talk about it as, right? And it really creates some of that spring of a step, like the arch when you land in your foot, it stretches it out and then it springs back up when you push off. So that elasticity can get lost with plantar fasciitis and it gets kind of sticky. And then again, those first steps, when it does stretch, those little cross fibers break. And that's a lot of times where that pain is coming from.
Yeah, if you think about like an automobile that has leaf springs, that as you put pressure on it, it flattens it out. But when there's no pressure on it, it goes back into an arch. Well, it's similar to that in that every step you take, you're actually compressing that and that leaf spring or your fascia stretches out. But it does, like you say, return to its original position. Well, just imagine if you put one on there that's a little bit too tight. And now you go to step on it and it doesn't want to stretch and it begins to tear. And I think you said it a minute ago. The area that I see the most issue is right at the front portion of the heel.
Yes.
That's sort of the telltale sign.
Yeah, exactly. It's like right where it attaches onto the heel. And one thing that sometimes happens with this, just to complicate the issue slightly, is something called heel spurs, where if there's enough irritation of that fascial attachment onto the front of the heel, the calcaneus, it'll actually start to calcify and you'll get little bone spurs in there.
Yep.
That's just another element that can happen with plantar fasciitis.
And if we are talking about tendinosis, you know, if those tissues are this spring, and they're supposed to be running in one direction. Well, if it is calcifying and now those are building cross bridges, you know, in directions that it wasn't meant to grow, then those things are going to constantly tear over and over and over again. And that's part of what you're feeling when you step on it. It's like, oh, and it's tearing. And anybody who's ever had this knows it takes a long time for it to ease up and to heal.
Now, I want to start actually, I'm sort of going to go backwards. I want to start with some things that we've always used for, at St. Francis, when I was working at St. Francis and other places, to just help with the discomfort of plantar fasciitis. Okay. So a couple things. One is, again, with pain being that first steps in the morning, a lot of that is because, if you think about it, many of us at night, lie with our, right? We lie with our feet slightly pointed, right? Or they're under the covers, or especially if you like a heavy blanket or whatever, you're maybe pointing your feet all night. That's going to put that plantar fascia in a shortened position, right? For 8 hours or whatever, without a lot of circulation. So that really means that things kind of cross fiber in there and get kind of uncirculated and unnourished. Then you throw your legs off the bed and step up, and boom, suddenly that plantar is stretching. So a couple of things that we get a little extreme. I'm gonna go for extreme and then less extreme. There's a few options here. One thing we would do is really try to have people sleep with their foot, with their ankle flexed. So basically with their toes pulled back like a right angle. Yep. And so for some clients who really had recalcitrant plantar fasciitis, we would put like a little like a right angle splint on them to wear at night to keep that area stretched out while they were sleeping. Yep. That was one thing. The second thing was, the first thing in the morning is always the trickiest. So we would have them have like a little roller or something. So they'd roll off the bed, and before they even stood up, they would massage that plantar fascia. Ideally, although you have to get up to do this, ideally with like we always use like a round shampoo bottle that was full of warm water. And that was, so that got that button, if you remember from our fascia discussion, that helps to lubricate the glycosaminoglycans and get the fluid going a little bit more, and also help to relieve the tissues and kind of massage them and get them a little more pliable. Yep. So those are two like the things we would do at just a very first, like, how are we going to get over this? Because you have to be pretty aggressive, I find, to get over this. Yeah. So those are a couple of just little simple things. Yeah. What's interesting is the warmth technique. We also have used the cold technique if you want to get rid of the inflammation, where you take a water bottle and you freeze it. Yep. And a lot of times if I have a client who's at their desk a lot, I'll say, if you have a freezer at the office, freeze it overnight and then put it under your desk.
And then
Yep.
take your shoe off and just roll it back and forth on there just to help with the inflammation. Because again, you're just helping with the inflammation at that point, you know?
Or you're doing both. And you're stimulating the tissue. It's really what
true.
you're doing.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of times the tissue is just not healthy, right? It's been stuck in the shoe. It's been not moving for whatever period of time. And you're trying to get it more pliable, more circulation.
Yes.
Whether it's through heat or through cold or through massage or all those above, just trying to get that area stimulated to try to make it heal.
And they both will work. Heat as well as ice.
Exactly.
Down the road, I'm sure we're going to have the conversation of what should you do, heat something or ice something. In this situation, because heat is really going to help with the tissues themselves to warm things up, to loosen things up, whereas ice can help with the inflammation, especially at that heel area, right where it's got the most inflammation and it's angry. You can sort of spend some time on that and it can help calm the area down. Now, the splint that you were talking about, to sleep in, there's something called a Strasbourg sock, which is a sock that has a strap on the toe area that you loop around your calf. And it is very, very, very uncomfortable. But for those that I've had who have used it, who have gotten used to it, it takes time to get used to these things. It's kind of like trying to sleep in a boot. And I've had a number of clients who you try and sleep in a boot. It's like, okay, forget it. You're not be able to do that.
Right, you make it an hour, and then then you wake up, you take it off, and you continue the rest of the night, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I have a lot of clients who are like, they wake up without it, and then you remember taking it off. It just isn't on anymore.
Yep. But if they can get used to it, the sock actually does help. And what I find, and I want to get into something about the mechanics of the fascia in just a second, is it actually is pulling the toe up as well, which is a necessary thing to do. There's something called a windlass mechanism in the foot. And basically, if you look at the foot from the side, the arch that you see, that's where the fascia is. And think about that going under the knuckle of the big toe and into the big toe. Well, every time you lift that big toe, what's going to happen to that fascia? Well, it's going to tighten up and it's going to want to flatten. Okay, so every time you take a step two, that big toe bends, you're pulling at the fascia. So if you can stretch it out with the toe pulled up, it makes a huge difference, which is why the Strasbourg sock works differently than just being in a regular boot, which doesn't address the sock or address the big toe.
Right, the toe bit,
And anytime we do stretching, I make sure that one of the first things we'll do is remind them to make sure the toe is involved, especially the big toe. I find more than the little toes, the big toe is really the one that I find needs the most involvement. And to pull on that just to get the tissue stretched. So even if they're at their desk, they've used the water bottle or a heated bottle, whichever one they want to do, and then, cross the knee and then pulling back on that toe just to help gently begin to stretch out. Because as you said, we do need to get aggressive, but at the same time, at the beginning, sometimes you just need to stretch the area out. You just need to get it to be stretched a little bit, and just pulling that toe back in a dorsiflexed position can really help.
Right. So this is the mobility piece.
Yeah.
Now let's go a little bit into the mechanics of it. What I find for the most common reasons or the most common situations where clients get plantar fasciitis, there's a couple things. One I find is my clients who are runners who keep one pair of shoes for too long. So very, very commonly, if a client has a shoe that they love, I'll say buy 3 pairs and alternate them. Right? Just every week, just switch pairs so that they're not all breaking down in one long swoop, but you've kind of got the same, a slower breakdown. Because a lot of my runners, it's like after about 2 or 3 months, they'll come and say, oh, my arch is kind of hurting me again. I'm getting a little heel pain. And I'll say, have you been wearing the same pair of shoes? I said, oh, yeah. Let me see your shoes. And I look at the bottom and the tread is wearing off. They've got, a big divot on the heel or whatever it is. And I said, okay, your shoes are no longer supporting you. So some of that is part of the issue as well. It's like, that's one thing. The other thing too is, again, like we talk about tendonitis and tendinosis, is more than that area can do, right? We always talk about it as being an overuse kind of injury.
Absolutely.
Whether you're running more than you've done, or jumping more than you've done, or walking more than you've done, or standing more than you've done, any of those things where that tissue doesn't get the ability to really get nourished and get moving and build up the strength and endurance it needs for the activity.
And if you think about what we've talked about the last couple of weeks of tendinitis versus tendinosis, if it starts out as more of a tendinitis, if you rest it and take care of it, sometimes this can, before it develops into full-blown plantar fasciitis, it's more uncomfortable and you're like, oh, take some time off. People who suddenly start a new sport and they're on their toes a lot. I think tennis players, especially pickleball players, where they're on their toes and responding, they're in that position, or they start playing basketball and they're doing more jumping and the landing, especially if they're 20, 30 pounds heavier than they were the last time they, participated in the sport. That's a little bit more that the tissues are probably prepared to take. But I can tell you, I have two situations that you would never think, but they're both overuse injuries. One happened, one of my wife's best friend gave birth to her child, was rocking the child. She started telling me, her foot, she's got plantar fasciitis. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. I'm helping her from afar. She lives in Connecticut and I'm in DC. And I'm giving her all the things that I would suggest and it's helping. But we can't figure out what's causing it. Come to find out, it was sitting in one of those gliding chairs and she was using one foot to push off over and
Just
over.
the same foot.
Same foot.
Right, same foot.
And you figure, how many times are you doing that every night? Hundreds.
Could be hours.
Could be hours.
Depending on the morning, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And when it was sort of, she said, I think that's what it is. I'm like, ding, 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 absolutely. The number of repetitions. So we changed the positioning a little bit and it began to, it could start the healing process. So that was one thing. Again, thousands of repetitions every night and it caused the inflammation. The other situation that I brought up to people is I had a guy who is a runner. He's a born runner. The person, first time I ever heard him on the treadmill, I couldn't hear him running. He was like, he was gliding. And this is a guy that you look at and you think, okay, you're not a runner. I mean, he was kind of pudgy, British guy, pudgy and everything. And I put him on the treadmill for the first time and I thought he was just standing there with the machine running because I couldn't hear his feet. And I looked out and I'm watching him and I said, you were born to run? He said, yeah, I used to do marathons when I was younger. It's like, oh, wow. He got back into running when we were working together. He decided to do a 5K or a 10K with his daughter. And he didn't want to run side by side. So he ran the entire thing backwards in front of her so that they could talk. So he was on his toes, kicking back, running backwards the whole time.
Doing something he probably hadn't done.
And had never done it before.
At that level. Never done it before and suddenly does 5K of it or 10K of it.
Right.
Right? That's classic.
And he came in the next week and said, I don't know what's wrong. And he didn't tell me he did this. And I'm thinking, you're a runner. Maybe it's your shoes.
Right.
Again,
What suddenly popped you up? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking it's got to be shoes. It's got to be support. Okay. Arches, all this kind of stuff. And then finally he said, oh yeah, we did the 5K. And I said, but you run, or a 10K, whatever it was. I said, but you run all the time. You run miles. And he said, well, I was running backwards. I said, excuse me. I said, yeah, I was running with my daughter and, I wanted to talk with her. And so I was kind of jogging backwards and I'm like,
oh my God, that's so funny.
And again, he didn't even realize that it could do that. He didn't feel it at the moment.
Yeah. Right. Because he was warm and everything was mobile.
Yes.
Right.
And then he caused the damage. He caused the injury. And then it cooled down and basically froze up on him. And the next day he went to stand on. He's, I can barely walk.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay. So again, it can be caused by a number of things. I've had people be caused by suddenly starting a new job and wearing high-heeled shoes more often.
Yes, exactly. And in dancers, we get the same thing, that they're suddenly doing point work or their jumping's going up or they're changing their mechanics and something will happen with them.
Yeah. So it can be caused by a number of different factors. And for us, it's going to be the options on how we're going to work with the person, I think, is pretty much going to be very similar. And I'm curious what you do compared to what we do, sort of fitness versus Pilates. And I will say that I do use my Pilates equipment for this because I find it works really well. So if you want to jump in, what's sort of your go-to for some of this?
Well, I'm going to start with something. I'm going to go back a step before I go forward a step. And going backward a step, One of the things that is typically done for plantar fasciitis is to provide arch support.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That, all my podiatrists should always do like a taping of the arch or arch inserts or something.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to, this is a little controversy, but I just want to address that. So one of the things that is problematic or a potential precursor for plantar fasciitis is a plantar fascia that is not mobile, that is not trained to work in different ways, that doesn't have a lot of flexibility and a lot of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if you put, for example, I'm thinking of some shoes I have. If I put my feet in a relatively stiff-soled shoe, could be a walking shoe. I'm not thinking about running shoes. I'm thinking about like a walking shoe, right? Like a kind of a stiff-soled walking shoe. And I walk around all day. It's a bit like putting your foot in a cast.
Mm-hmm.
Because the foot doesn't, it's like my toes aren't really bending when I push off because the sole is too stiff. And you really are not using the mobility of that plantar fascia very effectively. Right? Same thing in some running shoes, which are, they arch support and they got this and they got that. And like they keep you in this position. And maybe or maybe not, you have even that ability to flex the metatarsals.
Right.
A lot of running shoes are really stiff there. So a lot of what we do in our daily life is going to lead to a plantar fascia that is understimulated, that is potentially getting stiff and fibrous in certain directions because it's being held in one position,
mm-hmm.
or it's not being allowed its full range of motion. So I just want to use that as the background for what I work on. So, so when I work with clients, I do two things. There's two things that I found to be really helpful. One is looking at and this is a little random, but looking at the eccentric strength of the gastroc and the soleus.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that, this is in the Pilates realm, there's an exercise called Achilles stretch, where the front of the knee is on the seat and the foot is on the pedal. And you're basically pushing the pedal down and up. So you have a bent knee, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. That all makes sense to y'all. And basically with many clients with plantar fasciitis, I discovered that their gastroc was pretty strong. Like they could do a straight leg releve or heel lift, no problem. But when they went to a bent knee, they had no strength at all. So there was an imbalance between the gastroc and the soleus strength. Mm-hmm. So when we strengthened the soleus, and just simple Achilles stretch there, and I'd start light and we would go, like we talked about, working on the eccentric phase, not the concentric phase. So then push down relatively quickly and then a slow release of the pedal. And things would go like, mm-hmm. like nothing was smooth there. And I would slowly build that up. And that made, for a few clients, like almost an immediate difference, mm-hmm. and very quickly helped things get better. So that was one thing. As we look on the eccentric phase of the soleus in that mm-hmm. case. And remember, the gastroc and the soleus Achilles tendon comes down and connects directly into that plantar fascia. So balance through that tendon is going to influence the health all the way to the bottom. The other thing, which is a little more obscure, but I also found was really helpful, was looking at the balance of strength on the medial and the lateral side of the foot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I always think of the foot as having two halves based on where force comes through. So there's the side of the foot, which kind of comes through the calcaneus, the heel, the cuboid, the outer toes. And then the other one comes more through the talus and the navicular and the first two toes, roughly. And if I would just do a simple strength of the toes, mm-hmm. I could put just my fingers under the big toe and the second toe and how strong those are versus the outer toes, I would often find a really strong imbalance between the medial and lateral side of the foot.
Yes.
So then I would work on, and this gets really fussy, guys, I know, but I would really work on strengthening that weaker side of the foot, whether it was the medial or lateral side, through TheraBand work, even just using my finger to have them resist it, little towel grabs with their little toes or with their big toe, things like that. And that also made a really big difference for a few clients to really get that balance of, because again, you're putting balanced forces through that plantar fascia. So these are baby steps, but these are beginning steps.
What's interesting is you brought up the shoes. I just want to go back a step because what are traditional therapies for this in general? One of them is orthotics.
Yep.
And part of the reason is they want to put an arch in there so that the arch, every step you take, doesn't fall down and doesn't continue to tear. So they're trying to put something there almost like you would cast an arm that's broken. You would, you're putting them into a position where that arch is going to be supported and sort of push up into it. So it's interesting that, one of the traditional remedies may actually cause it to not heal as quickly as we'd like. Because as soon as you go into a bare foot, then it does collapse.
I think it's pain relief, which is why they do it.
Yep.
Because it often does relieve the pain pretty quickly.
Yep.
But it doesn't, I say it it cures the pain or decreases the pain. It does not solve the problem.
Right.
Because the problem is a non-dynamic plantar fascia that isn't resilient, that doesn't have spring, that doesn't have fiber angles going appropriately to do the work it's supposed to do.
Right. So it takes away what it's designed to do. Because remember, it's designed for shock absorption.
Yeah.
That's its primary job, is like the meniscus is a shock absorber. This is a shock absorber for the foot. So if you stiffen that up too much by putting something under it, it can, you're saying, it'll limit the amount of shock absorption you're asking it to do. And thereby, again, how many of us, when you're out and about, you're wearing your normal shoes, and I have orthotics in mine because I've got arthritis in one of my toes, so I need to limit the bending just so it doesn't inflame. But so I have orthotics, and they're fairly flexible besides that. But some people's orthotics are really inflexible. They're very stiff on the bottoms of their feet. But do they wear those orthotics all the time? No, they come home, they take off their shoes. And then they're walking around the house in house slippers or barefoot or in socks or something. So in those situations, you're asking the foot to bend a lot more. And so you have to remind them of that look, it will take, like you said, it's going to help with the inflammation. It's going to help with the pain relief. But we need to still get the mobilization of those tissues for the long haul. We still need for them to be able to become a shock absorber again.
Right. So for many clients, I've said, okay, do whatever you need to do for pain relief, because sometimes this can be really painful and limit functional activities. I said, but when you're with me, we're going to really work on getting, and it may be just that 1 or 2 or 3 hours a week, whatever it is, or maybe some homework, but try to get that strength, that flexibility, that pliability up. And then, if they need that, again, if they need the shoes or the orthotics for pain control, great. But when you're not in those, let's see what we can do to get that strength and that mobility back.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I usually do. I do a lot of stretching. I really focus a lot on the stretching aspect, and I do start gentle because, again, we're talking about something that's painful. So, bring the foot close to them, dorsiflex it, pull the toe back, really stretch it. I'll tell them sometimes take your thumb and do some gentle massage work on the bottom of your foot, just gentle as you're stretching it out. Sort of an active isolated stretch where you're providing a little bit of a gliding with your thumb as you're bending the toe back. So that can just open things up a little bit. So that's one way to begin the stretching aspect. And then we can get a little bit more aggressive over time, where I will have them go onto a stretch board or something. I like a stretching board rather than some of the other stretching techniques because they can just stand there and relax their heels down.
Like just a slant board, basically.
Slant board, basically.
Yeah.
But what I like about some of them is you can lock it in. And if you can lock it with the front of it being, there's 2 different types of slant boards. One where the adjustment is underneath it, and the other where the slant board itself sort of fits into slots.
Okay, right. Yeah.
I like the slotted version better because you can lock it in the second to highest one, and then put your foot all the way forward and actually bend the toe back on the wood so that you can keep the knuckle down and bend the toe as you're stretching the entire foot. And it gets that windlass mechanism. And I've had a number of people say that is one of the best, stretches that they have. Another way to do it is find a wall. Go ahead.
So you're in So you're in dorsiflexion. So your ankle, your toes are pulled back, and then you pull the big toe back on top.
Exactly.
Of that. And you're really just stretching that whole chain. Okay. I'm thinking of a lot of different ways to do that. So I just want to get that image clear in my head.
Right. But the way, if you don't have a slant board, is I also tell them take that foot, go up to a wall,
Yep.
and then put the toe on the wall and then push the foot down. So it's going to forcibly pull that toe back.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then with the heel down, take the knee and try and touch the wall. So you're
Yep.
getting that soleus,
Great.
you're getting primarily soleus, but you're going to
Yep.
also stretch that tissue on the bottom of the foot. And
Yep.
it is a relief like nothing else. Everybody's told me
Nice.
that feels so good, you know, and they'll hold it. And I believe in a little longer holds for things like this because
Yes.
don't bounce. Bouncing is not the thing to do for this. So just hold it 60 seconds, 90 seconds, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you're not in a rush. Just relax.
Well, it's connective tissue too. You're stretching the muscle somewhat, but you're also stretching a lot of the connective tissue. And I always find that takes a little longer to get to.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. And when it comes to strength training, I love the eccentric. That is something that I really have them focus in on. There's a study that came out. Now, this is fairly new research. When I say new research, the traditional therapies have been around since, dawn of time sort of thing. This, I'm not exactly sure the year of this, but I want to say 2015, 16 it came out. And the client who was running backwards was the one that brought this to me because he saw it in the New York Times, I believe. And he said, what about this article? And it goes against some of what people were originally doing. And it's basically high load strength training.
Uh-huh.
And especially when it's, at the beginning stages. So we're not talking about the tendinosis. We're really talking about it started. Hasn't been there for years, been there for a few weeks or something. And you want to do the stretching. Absolutely. Unilateral calf raises. And with a towel underneath your toes, not the ball of the foot, but under the toes. So you get maximum dorsiflexion.
Increase the toe flexion, toe extension.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So every time you go up, you're increasing that.
Right.
And
interesting.
Yeah. And what I told him to start doing was go up with 2 feet and then down with 1. Up with 2, down with 1. So he's getting the high load in the eccentric, but not in the concentric to start. And then he began to eventually work by week 3 or 4 of doing this. He was doing loaded. He'd put a backpack on because that's what the research had said. And he'd load it up with, a bunch of dumbbells. And he was doing unilateral, not only his body weight, but he was really working it. And it cleared up a lot faster than I'd ever seen. And we'll put this study in the show notes so you can read it on your own. But I found that fascinating because it goes against a lot of the traditional remedies, which is just stretch, just stretch. You don't want to load the tissues. You don't want to stretch.
Yeah.
So when I read this, I was like, ooh, I don't know about this, but he was willing to do it. So I said, hey, I'll walk you through this. We'll do it together. And if it doesn't seem to be working, we can back off. We can just change course. It worked like a charm for him. And I'm not saying it's going to work for everybody, but the research was pretty solid. So it's one of those, you can always give it a try.
And that's where that chair work comes in.
Exactly.
Because your toe is bent on that chair.
Bingo.
Because usually you're on the ball of the foot, your toe is already in extension, basically.
Bingo.
And you're adding that whole piece in, and it's loaded eccentric.
Yes.
Right, loaded eccentric with the bent knee. Because that was, again, I hadn't read the research. This was actually before the research was out, but that was like I tried that with somebody just somewhat randomly, and again, that was like the most effective thing we did.
Yep.
That and then balancing out the 2 sides of the foot for some other clients that I had, and it was a strength. I mean, there's the mobility piece, which is great because that's essential, but it was really the strength piece that made the biggest difference.
Yeah. I also find that there's something called a Jack's test. It's a muscle test where you can have the person just stand. And you want to see if they first can lift their big toe on their own. Just lift the big toe up away from the other finger of their toes. And then you try and lift their big toe when they're fully weighted. Try that on yourself sometime. You're going to find, when I first tried that, I couldn't lift my big toe. I thought, what's going on here? My tissues were a lot tighter than I expected. And it showed me how little pliability I actually had through those tissues. And it was a reminder that, maybe I should work this before it becomes an issue. Maybe I should try and begin working these tissues. And I started doing it with a few clients who, if they were talking about their feet at all, I said, oh, let's give this a try. Just see. And without a doubt, every one of them had that lack of flexibility on the bottom of their foot. They couldn't lift their big toe from the other toes in a weighted position. And I could not lift it to save my life. So that's called a Jack's test. And
so you couldn't lift it as an assisted?
As an assisted.
Like you couldn't actually, so it was just, it was a range of motion issue. It wasn't a strength issue.
Exactly.
Got it.
So those tissues were so tight. So again, it went back to the mobility issue where we had to create additional mobility. And a lot of those people, I'll do some foam rolling work on the calf, you know, at the point where the Achilles tendon meets the muscle, especially. And so do a little bit of release work on the foam roller. You can do, there's multiple ways of doing that. And start that. Also, small ball underneath the foot. I've got soft. I've got everything from super soft all the way up to like a golf ball and whatever tolerance.
And I've even got little tiny wooden balls that go between the metatarsals.
You're cruel.
We get the full range from big, from big soft squishy balls to little tiny ones that really get in between. All of that.
Oh man, that's just as cruel. I know what you're talking about though, because I have one of those. And oh man.
No, there's nothing fun happening there.
No, not at all. But I find all of these do help get that pliability. And once I have the pliability and get that range of motion, then I love doing toe work, which one of the best things, one of my physical therapists here, we had some small, like those wooden balls you were just talking about. We had some small ones that were rubber. And she saw them and she said, can I use these? I said, sure, go ahead. And I saw that she was using them to have them grab the balls with their toes and then dorsiflex and then move it to the side and let it down. So she was doing this sort of starting at 10 o'clock with the foot, grabbing one and turning it to 2 o'clock, putting it down, grabbing one and then put them back. And I watched this and I said, that's genius. I'm stealing that. You know, because some people say pick up coins. I've never been able to pick up a coin with my feet to save my life. There's no flipping way I could ever do that. I've tried. My feet are not that, dexterous. But using something as simple as that, and I mean, you can use marbles, you can use anything. It's just, and use different size marbles because some people's toes aren't ready to grip that small. But it really does work. And it begins to train the bottom of the feet a lot like the towel scrunch does.
I do a version of that. So I love that. And I've done that a lot and I like it. And again, having a bunch of different size balls and different textures are great for that. The way that I do that even without resistance is I have two exercises. One I call pulling back the reins and one I call the pencil toss. I do these without resistance necessarily. The first one is to plantar flex the foot. So point the foot and then flex the toes and then pull into dorsiflexion. Mm-hmm. And you really get that, like you're basically sort of separating some of the layers of the foot because the dorsiflexors are working along with the plantar flexors, and you just get some more mobility around the whole toes and the bottom of the foot. And then the other version of that is to extend the toes and push into that plantar flexion, and then grab the toes and pull back. So you're really getting range of motion in both directions.
Almost like a
and
cat
that's
does.
Kind of pulling back the reins.
When a cat's kneading on, that sort of,
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. But adding not just the finger motion, but the wrist motion, in this case, the ankle motion, really helps to mobilize all the muscles and tendons and gliding tissues that have to happen in there. The second one is, the feet can be like up in the air, they can be out in front of you. And basically, I dorsiflex the ankle and then I roll it in. So it's like the sole of my foot is facing my midline or facing the other foot. Then I grab my toes from there like I'm grabbing a pencil, and then I toss it out. So then I roll the ankle out, and then I grab it on the outside and I roll it in.
Yes.
So this is working the everters and inverters. And again, these are things that if your foot is up in the air, you'll get a burn through the whole ankle three-dimensionally pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Working the toes, working the ankle, working the calf. So getting all of those pieces going. And one thing I like to say about any kind of toe work is, I've said this before, but most people have done nothing with their toes.
Yes.
So if you do anything, you make progress. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they're starting from zero. So even just a tiny bit of work, mobility work or strength work, will make a lot of progress. It's not like the quads or the hamstrings where people have done a lot of work on them already. Right? You're starting from a place where a little bit of work can make a huge difference because many people have done nothing.
Absolutely. And what cued me in on this for the first time years ago, I was at a Pilates on tour in Chicago. And one of the lunchtime classes, I was teaching my classes, but one of the lunchtime classes was with Lolita. And it was with the foot. And I was the only male in the class, and almost everybody else is a dancer. And, they've all got, perfect, dancer feet, or most of them do. And I've got these size 13, 4E, feet on me, but she said that, we're all sitting down sort of Indian style, and we're playing with our feet. And my first thought was, when was the last time I did anything where I was playing with my feet? When I was working them with my hands. I don't ever remember. And if you talk to clients about this, a lot of people are like, ew, my feet they're dirty. Well, you can always wash your feet. It's not a big deal, or do it when you get out of the shower. But just working my feet with my hands, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And she actually gave me a comment and said, you have good feet for a guy. And I was like, ooh, one of the first few comments I've ever gotten about my feet. This was good. But it was interesting, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, working the toes in different positions, and just sort of playing with your toes and, flexing them, taking your toes as wide apart from one another as possible. How often do we do that? We don't. Things like that. Or can you literally lift the arch of your foot and then lower it again? Lift the arch of your foot and lower it again. All these things that I had never thought about. And here was this little old lady on the floor with all of us playing with our feet. And I thought, this is great. And I'd done that with a number of clients. It's been like, okay, this is really a cool thing to do. And especially when they do have plantar fasciitis and they have had issues with it, just to get them comfortable with using their foot, get them moving it, get it more pliable, get it stretching, even putting their fingers between their toes, like you're lacing your fingers together, your two hands, but doing it with your hand and your toes, just getting some mobility, getting those tissues to move in ways that they're not used to. It's a great way, because most of us don't take our feet out of our shoes.
Remember, if you just go back in evolutionary time, and not even really very far, what are our feet designed to do? Our feet are designed to accommodate to the surface below us, which really has only been smooth concrete for about, 150 years. Before that, it was cobblestones or dirt or roots or sand or something, right? So our foot was designed to respond to a dynamic surface that was constantly changing. And we were also walking a whole lot more, presumably, and running and that kind of thing. And then we got smooth, flat, predictable surfaces and hard shoes that really stopped our feet from moving, So all of that is great. I love that. That's a great story about Lolita.
Yeah.
And that also, right. And that's also that's kind of where I also have understood and figured out these imbalances in the feet. Because it's not till you play with it that you realize, one test I'll sometimes do is just use my finger and see if somebody can push my finger down with their toes or lift my finger up with their toes.
Yeah.
And I've worked with many, many people of all kinds who can have not even the strength to move my finger. And I'm not putting any resistance. I'm just putting my finger there and saying, can you push my finger down? And they can't push my finger down.
Yep.
And so sometimes what I'll start with, and this is something that I begin with, is if somebody doesn't have that mobility, like you're talking about toe extension, right? I'll say, okay, so take your fingers and move it into toe extension.
Yep.
Right, or as best you can, even if you can't very much, right? So if you don't have the strength yourself, whether in flexion or extension, just move it and start to get that idea that it can move. And that's where I discovered those imbalances in the medial and lateral foot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the sort of balancing out the medial and lateral. In a couple of weeks from now, we're going to talk about ankle sprains. We're going to get into a lot more of that, just the musculature. Yeah. We haven't talked a whole lot about the musculature and the foot mechanics. We're going to get into that when we talk about that, because this is a very specific condition that if you've ever had it, it's a lot like we talked about last week with tennis elbow. It can be just non-stop. The pain can just be unduring. And every step someone takes is like walking on broken glass. And it can take a while to heal. It really can. But the way to sort of do it are these techniques. Work on that mobilization. I find that stretch in every way, shape, and form is the first go-to with plantar fasciitis.
Yeah. And again, most people, again, don't know what their feet are doing, so they don't even know what's tight.
Yeah.
You know, the first time you have somebody roll on a ball, just roll their foot on a ball, even if they're in a seated position, it's like, what is happening down there?
Yep.
Right? It could be excruciatingly painful, and they find a spot in their along their fifth toe or along their first toe or in the center of the arch, wherever it is.
Yeah. What I do find that works, it's not my method, it's part of the melt method. And they have special release balls, and there's a special hand and foot kit. I find that their technique, Sue Hitzman's a friend of mine, she created this method. I find that the ball is really good because it's a soft ball. It's a larger soft ball that is used. And I find for a lot of my clients, it's a great way to start because they can be compliant.
Yes, it's not painful.
It's not painful.
They're not resisting, right? They're not like, pulling away from it and creating tension elsewhere.
Exactly. And you can go to the harder balls because it comes with, multiple level of squishiness in the kit. But it really can help. And she gives a very specific way to do the release work on the bottom of the foot. And at first I was thinking, why does that seem to work so well? And then it dawned on me, I don't know if it has to do with the fact that there's a specific way as much as you're telling a client who doesn't know what they're doing, here's what you do, and you give them a step-by-step instruction manual on where to hit it on the foot, how to do it, and they have something to follow. They can be more compliant than, here's a ball, wiggle it under your foot.
Yes.
It gives them a roadmap, a direction. Yes.
Yep.
So I find that can work wonders. You can find that online, meltmethod.com or Amazon, whatever. And it's just a neat way that I give to my clients, that it's like, here, do this. And they all like it because it does give them that direction. And then eventually they say, well, it feels better when I do this. And I say, look, you don't have to stick with just those directions. You're comfortable now.
Yeah.
Branch out.
Exactly.
Then I say, investigate what feels good. Or are there other sticky parts in the foot? If there are, how about working those a little bit? Investigate the tissues and really sort of figure out what works best for you. But I like that it gives them a starting point sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And starting with the softer ball, again, that can mean all the difference in the world. I had one client who has had foot problems upon foot problems. Unbelievable amount that caused so many issues. And when I introduced the softball to her, she was thinking, not a golf ball? I was like, oh, heavens, no. And when she first stood on it, she goes, it's painful, but I can do it. And you could see that someone had asked her to do a golf ball before, and she couldn't put any weight on it.
Yes. And she just was like, no, this is just painful. Why am I doing this?
And after a week, she said, I love that ball. I do it every day. I do it twice a day sometimes. Awesome. And now I asked her the other day, I said, how often and she goes, my mom stole the ball from me, so I don't do it anymore. I don't need to, but she does it every day. So I'm like, good for her, pass it along. So
Absolutely.
That's just another way to get those tissues to become a little bit more pliable. If you've ever had body work done on you, they get to your feet, or you've had your spouse or whoever massage your feet. Sometimes it can be very painful. It feels good, but man.
It's a hello. It's not subtle.
No, it's not. It's not.
We've been in Asia a bunch.
Yeah.
We traveled to Seoul, we traveled to China, and more than once in Hong Kong, we've gone and gotten foot massage. Right? And these lovely Chinese ladies that just start attacking your feet, and you're kind of like, right?
Yep.
And it feels really good when you're done, but man, going through the process can be quite dramatic.
Well, that foot reflexology, when I was in massage school, one of the other people that was taking it was a foot reflexologist already, but was working on her overall massage therapy license. And, we were doing the feet and everything, and she was my partner. And she said, do you mind if I use one of my tools? Oh, do what you, it's feeling good. Go ahead, do whatever you want. She came at me with this pencil.
Yes.
Had a point on one side and a little roundedness on the other. And she went to work and was finding, as she said, there's so much gristle in here.
Yes.
It was one of the most painful experiences I've ever had. But I have to tell you, when she was done, was blissful. Oh my gosh, did it feel good.
Yeah, and sometimes it's because they stopped. So there is that,
Yeah, right.
But it's also it's kind of like your feet suddenly feel alive.
Yes.
Because our feet often feel kind of like these dead things at the bottom of our legs that just move us around.
Yep.
And they feel like juicy and mobile and just like aware of what's happening.
Yep.
Yeah.
So again, not only stretch it, make sure you can do your own massage, use a small ball, use any of the softer balls, any of that kind of stuff I think is fantastic. And you said it a minute ago, it also wakes up the tissues, gets more blood flow, gets more fluid flow. You know, we talked about the fascial tissues. I mean, it does all of that. It's only going to help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this has really been a tips and tricks, right?
Yes.
This has been basically like, if you got plantar fasciitis, here's a bunch of things to think about.
Yes.
You know, footwear, what you're doing, how you're using your feet, strengthening, stretching, mobility, toes, ankles. So hopefully, I think there's some great tips and tricks in here. I'm excited about this. And I think a lot of people hearing this who have plantar fasciitis or have clients with plantar fasciitis will find something to play with in here.
You mentioned
because
footwear.
it really does.
And I have one more suggestion.
Yes.
I had a client who came to me who had severe foot issues. And it was right when barefoot running became popular.
Yeah. Yep.
Because she went to a doctor and the doctor said, oh, you should be barefoot running. She was a triathlete. So she immediately went to a completely non-supportive shoe.
Yeah.
So, and that caused more foot problems for her than you could ever imagine. So don't do that. I warn people, if you decide to do that, nothing wrong with it, but start gentle. Start gentle. Don't go out and try and do a 10K with unsupportive shoes when you've been doing nothing but using supportive shoes for the last 10, 15, 20 years. Be mindful when you change footwear significantly like that.
Yeah, because I would actually take that, because again, I work with a ton of runners and a ton of marathoners and that kind of thing, and serious runners. And anytime, so this is also why when somebody buys a pair of shoes that they find they like, immediately buy like 4 or 5 more pairs of those, because as you know, they're going to change that style. It'll never be available again, whatever.
Yes.
And then if you do decide to change shoes, what I always suggest especially for my serious, like 4 or 5 day a week runners, is, use your old shoes for 3 days and your new shoe for 1 day.
Yep.
Right. And slowly over a month or so, grade it into the new shoe, because that's always when I find my clients would have foot problems, is when they changed shoes or their shoes got worn. So those are just, little things to think about. A lot of people just fall in love with a pair of shoes. And this is like their golden boy, the one they're never going to let go of. And they wear them for 4 or 5 months of serious running. And suddenly it's really not doing the job it used to do.
Right.
But they don't want to get rid of it, and they don't have a replacement because that model is no longer made.
Yep.
So just, some advice if you're really a serious runner is really, really, really do that. Buy multiple pairs and rotate those. And when you change them, do that change slowly, especially if you're a long distance runner.
I remember my mom and her best friend trained for the Honolulu Marathon. And they did the 6-month prep. They were ready. The day before, my mom's best friend is a very eccentric person, or former best friend, very eccentric. Went out and bought new shoes, but not only new shoes, but new running shoes, basically for a sprinter. So they had no support. They were made for a track.
Light as could be.
And she showed up, and of course she was all decked out and saying, look at my new shoes and everything. And we just looked and went, uh-oh. I said, where? I said, please tell me your other shoes are in your car. Oh, of course not. I threw those away.
Oh, God.
She made it. I don't know how far she made it. She eventually took them off because they were causing more problems and did the rest of it barefoot, because it caused so many problems. Her feet took so long to heal out. She finished the marathon. I don't know how she did it. She finished the marathon. Her feet took so long to heal. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So that's one of those stories that I reiterate to people when they say, I want to change my shoe. I've started to run. I said, and I love that advice of 3 days on with the old shoes, 1 day of the new. That's fantastic. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
That one absolutely, I think, is invaluable for our runners.
Yeah, you've got to a sudden change of something you do that repetitively. And I'm thinking about my marathon trainers who are doing like a minimum of 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 miles, 3 or 4 days a week,
Yep.
like or more. That's repetition that needs to be, your body accommodates to that repetition and needs to slowly change that. It can't, if you change it quickly, you're going to cause all kinds of troubles. If it's not foot troubles, it's knee troubles, it's hip troubles. Like I've seen those go all the way up and down the chain when people do that change too abruptly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, you're right. This was sort of the tips and tricks for, what you can do for plantar fasciitis, but hopefully you've learned something, or at least it's, opened your mind a little bit to, maybe I should think about the bottom of my feet a little bit more. Maybe I should think about those tissues, and maybe I should stretch them out a little bit more than I do. Or if you're watching TV tonight, maybe massage the bottom of them or pull the toe back toward the knee and see, ooh, that's pretty tight. Maybe I should try and, stretch this out a little bit. So hopefully we've given you a little bit of something to think about.
A little foot awakeness, foot awareness.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us for Moving Conversations. If you have any questions, comments, or if you have a topic you want us to cover, do us a favor. Hit us at movingconvos@gmail.com. We'll cover it. We've got a bunch of stuff planned, but anything goes to the top of the queue. We have no problem with that at all. If you like what you're hearing, please do us a favor. I spent an hour yesterday talking to a social media expert, and he was telling me all about engagement and how we need to do things for engagement. So please like, subscribe, follow on everything from Instagram, and share if you can. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, it's only going to help us get in front of more eyeballs. So please do all of that. We'd really appreciate it. And until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye, guys.